Hello, I'm Mischievous Marchinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count.
Yeah, and I'm Dapper Dan Gavasan, and I too own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. And, you know, if annuals are kind of like plus size comics, then it's fair to say I think that graphic novels, count as well. And I will admit, I don't own Amazing Spider-Man Parallel Lives, but I do have all of the other graphic novels that we're going to be talking about today, and all of the annuals again, which I say do count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy.
Oh, just hold a second, Dan. I mean, like, if you're, like, okay, say you had Parallel Lives, you know, on that off chance that you scored that. I mean, does collecting just the Spider-Man graphic novels count as having the graphic novels? Like I have Death of Captain Marvel, which was the first graphic novel. Do you have that one?
No, I don't, but
Okay.
I collect the ones with Amazing Spider-Man in the title.
Oh, I see.
And that's what's important to me.
Okay, I see. Okay, well anyway, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Like, I could get all of the Spider-Man what ifs, but not the whole run of what if, and that counts? Thanks for joining us for the graphic novels, the 12th and final episode of season 7 of the Amazing Spider Talk. I mean, Dan, it just seems like just yesterday we were talking about Venom.
Yeah, a little bit of behind the curtain. It was almost yesterday we were talking about Venom.
Sorry, guys.
Yes. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, as well as hopping around in time with us because we recorded this season largely out of order, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review.
This podcast exists because of the space-time continuum and the support of our Patreon members. It'd be better to land the joke. If you want to receive early reviews and seasonal episodes, exclusive podcasts, and artwork, and help us to keep this podcast going ad-free, please go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the Patreon button to sign up.
In this season of Amazing Spider Talk, we've been traveling back to the late 80s and early 90s to the era of Spider-Man's history that saw the comic completely visually reinvented, with sales reaching a peak that will likely never be replicated, and a whole host of creative voices that went on to change the comic industry forever. Yes, we've been talking about the early half of writer David Michelinie's run on Amazing Spider-Man, where he worked alongside the founders of Image Comics, Todd McFarlane and Eric Larson, married off Peter Parker, and introduced the world to the hottest Spidey villain since the Ditko days, none other than Venom.
In this episode, we'll be revisiting a series of strange experiments in the Marvel line that arose from the rising popularity of the graphic novel format. Comics were slowly being accepted as literature in the United States, which opened the door for new ways to package the stories of characters like Spider-Man, and brought new artists to the books and presented opportunities to do big stories with returning favorite creators, opportunities known as sales.
Yes. If you want to read along with our conversation, weirdly, despite huge gaps in Spectacular Spider-Man being on Marvel Unlimited, all of the books that we're discussing today, as strange as some of them are currently available on Marvel Unlimited. They were also collected in print a number of years ago in a book called Spider-Man, the Graphic Novels, which I've seen run anywhere from like $80 to $100, which if you buy these individually, you're going to pay, I think, just about that much as well. So if you snag that, you kind of get them in all one place. But you can buy most of them individually, like I said, in most major comic book retailers, whether through reprints, which several of these got in the 2010s, or you can buy them in their original formats. And frankly, I would advise, if you're going to buy them in the original formats. They're not that much more expensive, and they usually are like better put together as a package from the 80s and 90s before everybody cheaped out on these things. But the books we're going to be discussing specifically are The Amazing Spider-Man Hooky, which is Marvel graphic novel number 22, The Amazing Spider-Man Parallel Lives, which is Marvel graphic novel number 46, Spider-Man Spirits of the Earth, which is Marvel graphic novel number 63, and Spider-Man Fear Itself, which is also known as Marvel graphic novel number 72. And I don't think any of these books have those numbers printed on them. It's just kind of like a cataloging thing of this kind of alt series, which doesn't really exist anymore. Although, I don't know. What was the last major graphic novel that Marvel did? Was it that Spider-Man Teresa Parker one, Family Business?
I don't know if that was the last one, but they did do like a series of graphic novels around that time. There was like an Avengers one also, I think, like about Ultron.
Rage of the Ultron, which is actually a really good story. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. And you could probably find that on Marvel Unlimited, unlike any of like the J.M. DeMatteis Spectacular Spider-Man run. The Child Within? Hell no. Spirits of the Earth, you betcha. God love Marvel Unlimited, and it's a very non-arbitrary way of publishing stories.
Well, now that they're like collecting those finally, maybe they'll actually like coincide and put them up on Marvel Unlimited at the same time, or maybe they're waiting for that book to come out before they like lost all of their sales, I guess, to Marvel Unlimited. I don't know. Anyway, Mark, we're talking about graphic novels today, and why this season? Well, it just so happens that these 4 graphic novels, which I think are the 4 kind of like prominent Spider-Man graphic novels, except for maybe Family Business, came out during this period that we're covering on this season. And Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about the format of graphic novels, why the 80s and 90s? Tell us a little about it for those who maybe don't know what that word specifically means to and what we're referring to.
Yes, I mean, what you know today as trade paperbacks, in fact, were another format back in the good old days of the 1980s and early 90s. So Marvel actually produced 75 original graphic novels between 1982 and 1993. The first one, as I alluded to earlier, was The Death of Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin. And that had a short cameo from Spider-Man in there, in Jim Starlin's never-ending quest to kind of pretend to care about Spider-Man as a character. He had this scene where Spider-Man was actually, when Captain Marvel's on his deathbed dying from cancer, Spider-Man was like too squeamish to go and say goodbye to him, which was like, supposed to show off his immaturity and his own discomfort with death. So there you go. Nailed it. 100%. Although Death of Captain Marvel is a pretty good story.
Yeah, I agree.
But the whole format was the brainchild of Jim Shooter, who he wanted a oversized, and Jim Shooter, of course, was the Marvel editor-in-chief up until just about the time this season of Amazing Spider-Man stuff started in 1986. But he wanted an oversized, quote-unquote, European-style, high-quality, high-gloss book. This was like in the late 1970s. He was playing around with this, but the launch was initially delayed while they were trying to figure out how to draw up contracts for each of the book. That old chestnut. I guess they just couldn't just publish them like comics.
Yeah. Can we talk about that European style? I don't know what kind of familiarity you have. We've never actually talked about this, but between you and I, with like European style comics and growing up or as an adult, do you have any familiarity with that or affinity for it?
Educate me, Mr. Dan.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm not going to act like the expert on this.
Push your glasses up and start talking. Come on.
Yeah. Of course. I am a professor now, Mark. So watch out. I may get all professorial on this as I choke that word out. Europe is kind of like truly the home of the sort of like modern comic book, if you will. But they were much more accepted into society in Europe. It's not. I mean, it's also not superhero based like it is here. They're a medium that has been seen for all ages. They've kind of been embraced as literature and as part of the European cultural tradition. If you go to like Belgium, especially if you go to like Brussels, they really celebrate the characters that have come out of the comic scene, whether it's something as sophomoric as something like Asterix and Obelix, or my favorite growing up, Tintin, by Hergé. Have you read Tintin at all?
I have not. I know I should, but I have not.
Yeah, they're wonderful. I mean, obviously culturally dated in ways that many people find problematic, but a really wonderful series. And I grew up with that, and they're printed in these giant sized books with pages of art that really let the craft really like show itself. And that's kind of the style of like most European books, is these big, often hardbound, but really thin, like kind of done in one stories. Oftentimes it's not like the manga out of Japan where these are endless things. Now, other ones I love for more modern things. I don't know if you've ever heard of Black Sad, which is like a sort of like noir story, like detective noir stories told with like animal people, like straight out of Disney. But that's another popular book out of Europe at the moment. But I'm just like hitting the tip of the iceberg on this, but the culture is so deep there, and it's really like revered. And I think like Marvel, once the popularity of these books started, to increase and find its way into like colleges and things like that, often with Stan Lee, the next step is to kind of like start printing these things in a manner that matched the European style, where, you could really embrace it as an adult literature, or at least dress it up that way. And that's kind of like, I think when he's talking about European style, what he's really talking about is large pages, like big specialty art that maybe goes outside of just pencils, inks, the standard comic book fare that we know of, and really embraces it as an adult medium. So anyway, that's a very, very brief introduction to European style comics.
And today, European style just means highly tariffed, I'm assuming. Anyway, but yeah, so when you look at like the early run of these graphic novels, I mean, yes, there were some established characters being featured, but like they were also very often used to pilot new properties and IP for Marvel. Like, famously, like the New Mutants came out of an original graphic novel, and Dreadstar, who was had a comic book series, was another. But then on the flip side of that, you had X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, which was basically like the plot of X-Men 2 from the early 2000s. I mean, which is probably, is that still considered the best X-Men movie, Dan? I can't keep up anymore, but like,
I mean, in my heart, I think yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's other really great ones, and I was lucky enough to teach God Loves, Man Kills last year, and David Hayter, who does the voice of Metal Gear and wrote X2, came to my classroom to speak about adapting that comic. And so I'll just say, if you haven't read X-Men God Loves, Man Kills, it's so amazing. And talk about like embracing the adult stuff in that. It opened with like a very like racially charged, there's a lynching that harkens to the sort of like civil rights era movements. It's stuff you just would not see. Like the bad guy is a priest that is like condemning mutants. It's maybe the most charged until modern times that those books would get, with like the language of civil rights. And so it was really dressed up for adults in the way that I think the comics weren't as much at the time.
Yeah, which is, I think, even as we get into these Spider-Man ones, you can, they weren't maybe as edgy as that, but like, and we'll obviously get into the details, but they're clearly being, these stories are being developed with not just the mainstream, monthly comic book reader audience in mind, and I think that's kind of, again, what was part of the, I don't know if you would call it a lore, but part of the attraction with these original graphic novels. And it took until 1986 before Spider-Man got his first starring role in one of these, which was Hooky, which we'll be talking about very shortly. But by the late 1980s, early 1990s, Marvel was producing nearly one of these things a month.
That's pretty crazy. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I think part of the reason why is it's reflective of the industry and where it was going. Like right around the time that in parallel to this season that we're talking about in the 1986 into the late 80s, that's when the industry had things like Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, and then Watchmen, and we talked a little bit about this in our season finale last season, and kind of going along with Gang War in terms of like the darker storytelling.
Yeah.
But like beyond the darker stories that were becoming very in vogue for Marvel and DC at the time was this format. It was like, granted at the time these were both collections of single issues, although like Dark Knight Returns, it was they were these maxi issues that and I think it was 4 of them total.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like but Watchmen was 12 issues, right? Watchmen, or am I?
Yeah, but the I think what was important is around this time is when those were like reprinted and packaged as one thing, right?
Correct.
And that's
correct.
what really like led the sales, on these, and still leads the sales on these.
For sure. I think I'm just making the point, like, yes, the idea of the format itself of collecting these issues was becoming very popular, but like Marvel was producing these things independent of its regular series, and started to kind of pump them out in rapid succession, I think, to kind of be like, hey, this format is very popular and catching on right now. Let's catch the wave and do one of these, a month or every other month, basically.
Well, it's also interesting that you used the word wave, because like a lot of this did come out of like Britain, right? Like you've got these really huge, talented, creators in the UK, and again, harkening back to the European like approach to like comics, and you still have like your Alan Moores, your Grant Morrisons, like these people that are coming from Europe and remaining big forces in the comics today. But Marvel is kind of riding that wave. And again, I like, just to distinguish, like, yes, we have trade paperbacks now that collect, issues, but like the graphic novel, I still like hold as separate. I mentioned Spider-Man Family Business. It's these sort of like complete stories, it's kind of what DC's Black Label exists for, or, I mean, Vertigo, did this kind of stuff where, it might be, now we have these mini series, but even that's different than a graphic novel. Graphic novels were usually some bold approach in some way, and we'll talk about how successful they are on for these 4 books. But they usually represented some, a big artist, a big writer, like doing some definitive take on something. I mean, the death of Captain Marvel being a great example, and a book that hasn't been unwritten, since that, like, he joins Uncle Ben as like one of the few like people who stay dead.
Yeah.
So I want to distinguish them from annuals. Like, these are not just, and they're supposed to not be just plus size stories.
Right.
They're supposed to be taking advantage of the medium itself. That we can go and all texty and Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message, and all that stuff. But like, a good graphic novel is using the medium as a way to do something different than what you got on a normal comic book page. So I guess that brings us to, let's talk about our first one here. We're talking about Amazing Spider-Man Hooky, a very strange title. I think it's referring to the fact that Spider-Man leaves this universe and is, I guess, playing hooky. This is a Marvel graphic novel number 22, released May 14th, 1986. Who are the creatives behind this, Mark?
It's Susan Putney, and with art by Bernie and Michelle Wrightson. And I feel like you have something to say about the artist here.
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Wrightson and his wife, Michelle, who did the colors on this book. Which it's kind of hard to distinguish because a lot of it's painted. So like, I imagine she might have done the painting inside of Bernie's lines. Cause there's some really beautiful like tableaus, in here of the sky, and that are really take advantage of the color being a major aspect of this. But Bernie Wrightson is really I think he's known amongst comic artists as like one of the most detailed and expert artists to ever, command the medium. If you go and search his name, you'll probably come up with like his images of Frankenstein that he drew that are just stunning. His like command of shadow and line. And in more kind of conventional comics, he had a long run of Swamp Thing with Len Wein. That kind of, if Alan Moore reinvented, the character with his writing, I think Bernie kind of like reinvented the look of Swamp Thing and made it into that kind of like more human horror monster. And you can just look up his stuff. It's really iconic and known for its sort of like pulpy, like soft texture, if you will. Like it's like flesh, like things felt real and fleshy and like modeled in a way that like comics really didn't at the time, and with like flat renderings. His was just, let's pack in the hyper detail. And we'll talk about more about how that applies to this particular comic, because I think his approach is really interesting. If like effective in some places and not in others. But Mark, why don't you tell us kind of a summary of what happens? You're a recap guy. What happens in this book?
Sure. I don't think I get like a special segment here, but Spider-Man is pulled into a fantasy world by an eternally 12-year-old sorceress named Mirandy Spindrifter to defeat the. I'm gonna make an attempt here, Dan.
Okay, here we go.
The Torden Kakerlak.
That's about as good as I could do it.
Nailed it. In the dimension of Cloudsea, also known as the Thunder Cockroach. This horrifying shape-shifting creature is revealed to have been a construct from Spindrifter's father, who used to determine his daughter's power and confidence. That's not a Spider-Man plot, Dan. Well, it is a Spider-Man plot. I shouldn't say.
Yeah.
Is that a common Spider-Man plot? So what are your thoughts on Hooky as a general Spider-Man story, Dan?
I don't think it's a particularly good Spider-Man story. I'm just going to come out and say it. I know that like this one has kind of gained its fans over the years. And I think is kind of iconic for being that comic you see when you're walking through a convention and someone has it up and it has Spider-Man with this like very stark white cover and this creature that is like maybe symbiote adjacent. It's this like goopy, swampy thing with teeth and tendrils that are all wrapping around Spider-Man, and it's hyper rendered. And I think people see that cover and it immediately kind of evokes something in them. I think there's a lot of things to like about this comic. I don't think the writing is necessarily one of them. And maybe like the graphic novel format is a great way to kind of like take Spider-Man out of his comfort zone and play hooky, if you will. But this feels to me like a heavy metal story from the Heavy Metal magazine that just had Spidey inserted into it. I don't think there's anything particularly Spider-Man-y about it. Yes, It does some perfunctory like I won't kill, and like Spider-Man is two people and he's a New York hero, a fish out of water thing. But I've often criticized this book as like I feel like the writing feels like it's being made up as it goes along, and in fantasy, when the rules feel made up and nothing is consistent, I check out. That's just me. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, look, I made the joke a few seconds ago, but it's just not a Spider-Man story. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it features Spider-Man, but there's nothing remotely Spider-Man about it. I think like, the other three books that we're going to talk about, they have elements that are at least, in some instances Spider-Man adjacent or like, okay, yeah, I can see Spider-Man in this situation, although it's a little offbeat depending on which book we're talking about. But this is just like, it's a fantasy story that Marvel has decided it was, okay with, one of their most famous properties being inserted in the middle of it. Like I like you said, I don't see anything about this where I'm like, oh yeah, this feels remotely comfortable as a Spider-Man story.
Yeah.
And like, you can make the comment, oh, well, he's out of his element, but like, I don't like, okay, fine. But like, like I can insert Spider-Man into World War II and have him, fight Nazi Germany, which we actually will get to a little later, but like actually in like 1944 or something, and it would be like, no, this makes no sense.
I feel like that story does exist now that you're saying it.
Well, I know.
Throw a dart, you'll hit an interpretation of Spider-Man.
Sure. But but that's the point. I mean, like, yes, you can do Mad Libs with anything and insert Spider-Man into the middle of it. But it doesn't actually make it a Spider-Man story if it's not rooted in any real true Spider-Man mythology or characterization or any of that. And the art is very lovely. But
that's the thing. Bernie Wrightson like puts his heart into this. It's like such a misuse of his talent. This guy goes for it in this comic.
Yeah, and I know nothing about Susan Putney. I mean, did you find anything in your research about her?
I did a very little bit. So, the book doesn't do anything to highlight her.
Right.
Like there's no backups that tell you who she is. No like cover sleeve thing that says this is who this person is. And I could find no other like comic credits, from her. So like she's kind of just disappeared. She wrote a few sci-fi stories in some anthologies, and there is a rumor that she or like some conflicting like thoughts that she may have owned a comic book store that Bernie Wrightson attended. And so I've always felt like she kind of got brought in, like maybe she was like a family friend of his, and so like they had a good relationship, and so Marvel agreed to make it happen. But then I found this quote from Jim Shooter about it. And so this is what Jim Shooter had to say. In another case, a woman sent in a plot for a graphic novel. I liked the ideas. She wasn't ready for prime time, though, but with a great deal of help from the editor and brilliant artist Bernie Wrightson, her story saw print and did well. I wondered whatever happened to her. It seemed to me she had a great potential. So even to Jim Shooter, she disappeared, but it seems she sent in a plot that he liked, back in the time when you could send in a plot and create Venom, and I don't know what it was that made it stand out to Jim enough to go like, let me put incredible industry talent, Bernie Wrightson, with this person that's not ready for prime time. But he says the story did well, so it must have sold well. And again, I've seen more copies of this than I know what to do with, for a graphic novel of this type. So it must have done pretty well. And you still pay top dollar for it today. So Susan Putney, come out of the woodwork. Tell us who you are and the work you've been doing in the years since.
I read that quote and I feel like it's like Susan Putney, more and more people are talking about her these days.
Yeah. Well, even the name Susan Putney sounds like a made up pseudonym, or for maybe like Bernie Wrightson, who said, "I'm not confident in my writing. Right. Why don't we blame it on Susan Putney?" Anyway, so I've always had my kind of speculation, but at least this podcast got me to find a little bit about her, which doesn't say much.
Right. What else do we want to say about this, Dan? I mean, I'm sausage, revealing sausage making here, but here is a note I agree with 100%. Like, this almost feels like it needs like another Marvel character here, like a Doctor Strange or something, to kind of tether this to the Marvel universe. Because that's the other. I mean, I said earlier, this isn't a Spider-Man story. It is. I don't even know if it's a Marvel story. Like, what is this? Like, it's so out there, and it's not tethered to anything else that feels remotely familiar.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think even the name kind of gives it away. Of the land that they go to, right? They go to Cloud Sea, which is like not a very like thinly veiled, I think, copy from Ursula Le Guin's Tales from Earthsea, right? Her popular series of Earthsea books.
Right.
Like this is a like fantasy adjacent thing. And again, it doesn't feel like a Marvel book, at all. And I think it really comes down to this character of like Spindrifter, this girl that this like 12-year-old girl that Spider-Man, or this timeless, ageless 12-year-old girl. But the design is so uninteresting. She's like a girl in like a Yankees ball cap, which like boo Yankees, but also like it doesn't feel like a Marvel, like something that would come out of the Romita Senior like art directed like a house, like, and that's why like the whole book feels like, not only does it feel like it like is a better place for Doctor Strange to be in a title like this, but if you're gonna do the sort of like Spidey, out of his element, like most of Cloudsea feels like they're like drifting into some other realm from Doctor Strange, and it would just make more sense with that. And I don't think that character is interesting enough, that little girl, to like buoy the stuff that Spider-Man, is involved in, beyond just some nice looking art.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you think about the fact, like, if this format was kind of being designed to, like, both be experimental, but also to kind of pilot, new ideas or whatever for maybe future use. I mean, I guess they did half of that with this, but like, the fact that it outside of the experimentation, it doesn't really go beyond that. It's just this one-off thing that we really would never, I know you joked earlier, like, throw a dart and you'll get like some kind of random Spider-Man thing, but like, I can't recall anything else that's, was like this, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's almost like raises the question, what was the point of this? I hate to be so, I mean, it's like, like you said, maybe it was just like, Bernie Wrightson was like, I'll do this if I can work with this writer who may be a family friend. I don't know, but like, or a godchild, who the heck knows?
I mean, every once in a while, Marvel will do some like, like mini series that's like very fantasy heavy. Like I'm thinking about Kara Andrews did that amazing fantasy series a couple years ago that I didn't like very much. There was that like Strange World or I forget the name of it. That sort of like, fantasy world where that portal opened up over the like water a number of years back in the Marvel universe. I mean, this has got like Frank Frazetta girls, there's a whole sequence with them in this. It's very strange. I think about like maybe the closest I can think in terms of Spider-Man to this is something like Spider-Man Fever, but even that is like a Doctor Strange, crossover, right, into this world, and feels more Marvel adjacent. The thing that I find most interesting in this, beyond the sort of like horrifying monster, which is fun to look at, like there's a great spread of like the monster turning into a dragon and Spider-Man blocking his flame breath with a web shield that I think is pretty cool and has a sort of like Army of Darkness kind of thing to it, with like a modern hero in a sort of fantasy setting. Is the way that Spider-Man is portrayed in this, especially once he gets into the fantasy world. It looks like someone took like the Ralph Bakshi 1960s Spider-Man cartoon and just like tossed it onto a page of like deeply rendered Bernie Wrightson artwork, where you've got like sinew and flesh and all of this like cross hatching and stuff. And then there's just like a flat, like shading, depthless Spider-Man tossed in there, with like, who often loses parts of the detail on his costumes. It's really weird that like it creates this like feeling of two separate worlds combining together, which I think goes to the themes of the book. But it's just a very strange artistic choice to like render Spidey different than the rest of the world, like, but not like fully commit to it all the time. I don't know if that stood out to you at all, but I've always found it an odd art choice in this book, and clearly a deliberate one.
I mean, now that you mention it, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But no, I mean, like, I have to admit, like, as I'm rereading this, I'm more focused on like, oh God, when does this thing end?
I mean, that's the big thing is this book is boring. Like,
Yeah.
I just think it's deeply boring.
Yeah.
But like, if you don't read it and you flip through the pages, I think there's some joy to be had
Yeah.
just kind of paging through it.
For sure.
And as a sort of novelty item.
All right. Well, let's talk about our second graphic novel here, which is Parallel Lives. That's graphic novel number 46 from March 28th, 1989. This was written by longstanding friend of the show, Jerry Conway, with pencils by Alex Saviak, another friend of the show. Parallel Lives tells the stories of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson and how their unique love story is born from the shared traumas they experienced as young people. Through their shared secrets and the masks they wear together, they prove they can overcome the obstacles that their world throws at them. Dan, you and I famously talked about this in our Amazing Fantasy Remix episode during the 60th anniversary season that we did. I will say as a starting point, and you can take it from here, I love this story. I actually really adore Parallel Lives. I mean, it's not without its flaws, but like I think very highly of this.
I love this story too. And it's funny because there's not rereading it. There's not a ton that's like new content in the story. Like a lot of it is like Alex Saviak like playing the hits, right?
Yeah.
Like he basically recreates Amazing Fantasy 15 whole cloth, in this comic, as well as, Amazing Spider-Man 42. It is weaving in Ditko and Romita era imagery, reproduced or updated or with his particular style, which I think errs much more on the side of Romita. And so you do get a sort of like what if Romita drew X, Y, and Z from the Ditko run, including, Amazing Spider-Man 33. And all of that stuff. And it's all very lovely. And I think absolutely like first class in terms of like reproduction, it's like very much like lovingly done. And it's not like a John Byrne chapter 1 trying to sort of like make his mark on it. But I think the novelty to this and what makes it great is not like the new content, it's the like reframing of the stories, just very much by taking the history of what had been done by all of these different creative teams. And the book is great to like credit all of the people who worked on those chapters, whether it be like Ron Frenz, Tom DeFalco, like who reshaped Mary Jane and all of that stuff. And which I think really love that it credits them, but it's the sort of like, hey, all those pieces were there. Like, let's just condense it and then put them parallel to each other. And that's the brilliant stroke is, if you didn't already think that Mary Jane was the perfect partner for Spider-Man, like this is the book that like cements that by saying their past, their legacies are like by accident or intentionality have perfectly mirrored each other. And I think for that's the brilliance of it. Not even the like story. It's the macro idea of it.
Yeah. I mean, what I appreciate the most about this story, and like, look, I don't know if this was ultimately the goal of this graphic novel series, but like, in comparison to the other stories we're going to talk about, I kind of think like it should have been the goal, which is that I feel like this is a very self-contained story, but I feel like, if some random casual person picked this Parallel Lives up on, the comic book stand or at a bookstore or whatever, wherever they bought, wherever they could find comic books, they could read this, get a total understanding for Spider-Man and his universe, and thus be inspired to go buy future comic books starring Spider-Man, because it's like, oh, I want to read more about Spider-Man and that Mary Jane, his wife, and or Dr. Octopus. Like, oh, I see Doc Ock on the cover. I want to buy that comic now. It's yes. I mean, for for the hardcore people who've been reading since day one, I mean, yes, we're retreading a lot of things here. It's we're retconning some stuff, but like, I feel like these are acceptable retcons, and that like, there's nothing in here that you really could need to know prize away, and there's nothing in here necessarily where you're like, oh well, that changes so much. It's just like window dressing, I feel like.
I mean, maybe I think the retcon of MJ knowing that Peter was like Spider-Man from the night he became Spider-Man is like a big deal, and doesn't really work, but I don't really care.
I guess my point is, yes, it's a big retcon, but like, does it truly affect, if you go back and reread all the stories with that lens, does it truly change anything? I don't know if it does. You know what I mean? Like, the way MJ's character has been established as kind of being very guarded and protected, and, you know, wearing all these masks, which this book also plays with and demonstrates proficiently. Does it really matter if you go back to Amazing Spider-Man number 42 with Face It Tiger that she knew all along? I don't think it does. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it really changes anything. I that's my take, and maybe I'm just being like lawfully loyal to this book or something.
I think on the micro level, like, you could find like passages of the books that just don't make sense if she knows that Peter is Spider-Man. But like, as a sort of like on the macro, like holistic level, like the work that they do here to suggest like, and also to kind of break up the time of like, why was Mary Jane hesitant to meet Peter is like kind of a new wrinkle that they added in here.
Yeah.
And I think everything they do makes sense. And for me, it's kind of like One More Day, where like, if you go back and reread this, like those stories thinking like, okay, like how would this work with Peter and Mary Jane as just roommates and not a married couple?
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense. And like, you kind of have to read that stuff and in your head go, you know, it's a retcon. Like, I'll choose to accept it when it works and not when it doesn't. And I don't have any desire to like be that piecemeal about what does and doesn't work. I think the truth of it feels great in this book, and I don't think the ramifications of it really echo across other books, because she knew at the time in the comics, she knew that Peter was Spider-Man as well. And so it doesn't change anything about the present, publishing of Spider-Man comics. And I can't really think of many flashback books that really address this either. I mean, Spider-Man Blue doesn't get into this, which is also to say, like, we don't get Spider-Man Blue without this title. Like, I think this very much like set up the rehashing old stories to add a different wrinkle. Like, this is the Mary Jane version. Spider-Man Blue is the like Gwen Stacy, kind of like alternative to this. The image that I think of when I think of this book is the that one page that's literally a sort of like almost ink blot test or parallel thing where Peter and Mary Jane's faces are merged together from behind as they both experience like a moment of horror tragedy. And the tears that are just pouring down her face. To me, that's one of the most iconic images in this title. And to me, allows Saviek to elevate himself along the like level of Ditko and Romita, in terms of like adding some like an image that is like not just redoing their stuff, but like giving us something new on that level. To me, it's become an iconic image for me.
Yeah. No, that's a great one.
I also want to say, like, in terms of the graphic novel format, to me, this feels like the American graphic novel versus the European graphic novel. Like, this is very much an American comic book, like with all of the like standards that we come to expect of like pencil or inker. I think the only thing that really stretches the sort of like formatting, other than the bigger pages and the binding, is Bob Sharon's coloring is like textured and soft in a way that like I don't think that many of the other comics of this time period were really doing. And so they, I think, leaned into that, and it gives it a really unique kind of like hazy memory kind of look that I quite like. But but like, I don't think this is doing the European thing in the way that our next book is very much doing. Like, this is, I think, the ideal version of, like what you said, the American graphic novel.
All right. Well, you baited us, Dan. Let's talk about the next one, of which I have a feeling I'm probably gonna get hated on Reddit for talking about, which is
I don't know about this.
I don't know. Well, Spider-Man: Spirits of the Earth, July 31st, 1990. Words and art by Charles Vess. And the story of this is when Mary Jane inherits a small plot of land in rural Scotland, she and Peter decide to embark on their second honeymoon and to clear up the legal issues surrounding the home. Instead, they find themselves caught up in small town politics and an unfolding ghost story that is pushing the residents out of their homes. As Spider-Man, Peter is guided by an elderly woman named Maury to uncover a scheme by the Hellfire Club to eradicate the locals so that they might exploit the powers of the crystals that exist in the caves beneath their ancestral homes. I mean, Dan, you can hear my cynicism as I'm reading the synopsis. I mean, look, I'm gonna kick off this conversation by saying I know people love Charles Vess's artwork. He's had many famous spreads. I was in doing my research for the show. People are like, I found the hardcover of Spirits of the Earth. Look at how this beautiful Charles Vess book, and it's indeed beautiful. But this book as a plot, as a story, I think is an absolute snore.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I don't think it's the most riveting Spider-Man story, but I think it's a handsome attempt. I love Charles Vess's artwork, I think, more than you. I mean, how could you go wrong with Web of #1's cover?
Sure.
One of the all-time, covers. I, for a long time as a kid, had that double, page spread or the fold-out of the Hobgoblin.
Yeah. I know.
It's all great stuff. And I got to meet Charles Vess at Baltimore Comic-Con, and that was really thrilling. And I think this book is stunning to look at, frankly, Mark. I think it's gorgeous, and I think it succeeds at the fish out of water thing where Hooky, I think, fails to a spectacular degree. I think it could have used more pages or more time to flesh out those elements. But the bits that we get, I think, feel really authentic. The way that this is very European. The art style is European. The particular medium is European. The way that people look is European.
Yeah.
It's very much a wide distinction from what we normally get.
The term that I think of when I read this book again was it's very soapy, meaning like soap opera. Like I felt like these were like this reads like a romance comic, and I don't mean like necessarily a love story, but like a romance comic from the 1950s, in my opinion. Like and I don't know, like I get what they're going for here. It's just like this is a tough hang for me. You know what I mean? Like I'm reading this and I am just not having fun in this universe because like it just feels very stodgy and old fashioned and I'm gonna use a word that I never thought I would use on this show, un-American. And I don't mean that in a jingoistic way, but like, yeah.
It certainly sounds like it, Mark.
I guess so, like we knew the turn would come eventually, Dan. But it just feels, like an old English soap opera. And and now I'm gonna just start picking it apart because I have to.
Go for it.
The whole plot of this is so Peter and Mary Jane, they go on a second honeymoon to Scotland because Mary Jane inherited a house.
That's the worst part of this. It's right up there with Aunt May inherits a nuclear weapons facility.
I am 100% sure that there are multiple episodes of The Simpsons from the last 5 or 10 seasons where they had a plot like that where where it was intentionally supposed to be stupid and absurd and like, oh, hey, Homer inherited a haunted house. We got to spend the weekend there to win $1 million. Okay, Marge. I mean, like, you know, like what, like that is an absurd Spider-Man plot. Like, it's a second honeymoon. Great. To Scotland. Okay. Because I inherited a house from, and then it was like, but like, look at these pictures. I'm in these pictures. So I actually existed in this world. You know, like I don't know these people from Adam, but I exist in these pictures, so that must be legit. I don't know. Like,
to me, that's the weakest part of the story. You know, like it's a hat on a hat. Like you could just have them go on a second honeymoon,
right?
Because their first one got ruined by the puma. Right. So like put them like have them go. Like my wife and I talk about going to Scotland or Ireland on a second honeymoon.
Sure.
You know, whatever you want, like, or just a vacation as the rest of the world calls it.
My wife and I keep talking about going to Ireland, but then she took her parents a couple of years ago. So I guess I'm SOL on that. I'm never going to Ireland. The trip is over.
You got Amazing Fantasy 15. She went to Ireland with her parents.
I mean, to be fair, when I said I'm going to buy it, she said, well, I did take my parents to Ireland. I'm like hell you did.
I just touched the stove and didn't realize it, Mark. But there you go. Yeah, no, I think that's deeply silly, and you know, whatever it is you need to do to get these stories going, but that maybe was not the one to do with it. But in terms of like the pacing, I like the sort of relaxed pacing of this book. It feels different, like to match the sort of like rolling hills and mountainsides and small town feel of this Scottish environment. So that worked to me because I felt like whether there was action or drama going on, I was soaking up the ruins of these old castles. Like he goes to meet up with Mary at some point and she's living in this sort of like remains of this old tower on this like island that when the tide comes in, you can't access it. Like that stuff to me, like you said, romance novel, like it feels romantic, and on a second honeymoon, it soaked me up. You know, talking about like the printing of the hardcover, if you open it up on the inside of the binding, you know, are these beautiful like hatchwork, kind of like ink drawings that are just full of detail, and Spider-Man almost feels like he doesn't belong there. Like you get this beautiful countryside and towers, and there's a little Spider-Man there. And I don't know, I'm a sucker for that kind of thing. And I think there's enough Spider-Man elements to the story, the sort of like supernatural that's actually something tech oriented. There's like the death of a person at like Spidey's hands and this like retribution.
Right.
Like I think there's enough Spidey elements to make it feel, unlike Hooky, like a Spider-Man story.
Yeah, I don't accuse it of that the way I would with Hooky. You know, like it does feel more rooted in Spider-Man. I mean, just the sheer presence of MJ and like that dynamic, I think, roots it more in Spider-Man. I just don't love this story. I just find it very plotting, and I mean, you can call it relaxed. I just call it slow. Okay. I mean, and you know, your mileage may vary, but like, yeah, I'm very much like reading this being like, okay, now what? And you know, like, when is he gonna, like, you know, it's like, oh, he's fighting a ghost of what was the ghost? It was like a wolf or something, or I'm trying to remember now. Like early,
yeah, there's like old warriors and stuff like that, but it's very quickly revealed to be just like a fake projection to cover up something else, which strangely is, you know, the Hellfire Club, which like I think is there purely just because the design of the Hellfire Club soldiers look cool.
Right.
But like that stuff I don't really care about. There's this kind of like Joseph Campbell-y stuff in it that like, you know, Charles Vest makes a special thanks to Joseph Campbell, and you can see it with the sort of like, the idea of like nature healing itself after a tragedy. Like the villain of this is literally swallowed alive by the earth, and then like the Scottish countryside heals itself. And so you've got Spider-Man in a Campbellian story, which he doesn't normally occupy. But again, I like that as a sort of like fish out of water thing here. My biggest problem with the story is the third act. I feel like it just kind of ends, and that like Mary character, like they're summoned there by the death of Mary Jane's like Aunt Mary, and then we meet this Mary character, and there's like the young boy, and I kept waiting for there to be like a reveal, like she's actually a ghost, or like something that like could kind of give it a sort of like storybook whimsy, you know, in the end, to tie it together. Like, oh, we went through all this, but there was actually some, like the real ghost was in front of us the whole time. That would like maybe root it to Scottish folklore.
The real ghost was the journey we took along the way, Dan.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it kind of ends with like these intriguing characters that doesn't do anything with. And every time I've read this, and I've read it a couple times now, the third act just goes like, oh, it's over, and what's the deal with these characters? And to that point, I think, look, I'm not going to hold this up as a great story. It is underdeveloped, but it has such a unique flavor to it that, like, if I'm looking for a sort of like pretty thing to pull off my shelf and look at some, you know, Charles Vess artwork, I think this is like a really beautiful book in that regard. Maybe we're going like 2 of 3 here for don't read it, flip through it. And then there's this interesting backup where it's like a diary of like Charles Vess discussing his sort of like travels to Scotland and what the countryside means to him, and the work that he did. He painted this over 2 years of solely working on this book, so it meant a lot to him. And so you get these kind of like Joiner images, David Hockney style. I'm really getting into it here, Mark, in my art credentials, of like these Scottish countryside that he's pieced together. And I like that kind of stuff. I wish all of the books we're going to talk about today had some kind of backup to them that at least got into the rationale of like why this was greenlit in the first place, or like what this meant to the people that made it. If anything, which maybe brings us to the final one, which to me feels the most, I don't know if Hooky or Spider-Man Fear Itself, which we're going to talk about. It's like, why does this exist? What is the rationale here? So, Mark, why don't you tell us about Spider-Man Fear Itself?
Yes, Fear Itself, Marvel graphic novel number 72. We have nothing to fear but perhaps this graphic novel. It came out
not to be confused with the Spider-Man Fear Itself miniseries from the like late aughts or early 2010s.
Early. I think we're saying 2012, whatever.
Yeah.
February 18th, 1992, written by Jerry Conway and Stan Lee with artwork by Ross Andrew. I mean, sounds good, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, I will tell you, after a break-in at Osborne Chemical by an invisible ninja, it is revealed that the Cassidy crystals have been stolen.
What is it with crystals?
Crystals, I mean, you know, secret scrolls and crystals. Silver Sable, woo, is implicated
Mark's
in the robbery
favorite
of the fear-inducing rocks, which brings Spider-Man onto the case. Together, they travel to Germany to confront the person they suspect is behind the theft, a reborn Baron Zemo. Eventually, it is revealed that Zemo is not only reborn, but his mind is inside the body of a scantily clad woman who has been calling herself the Baroness. Together, Spidey and Silver Sable foil the Baroness's plans, but aren't able to save her from dying again. Woo! All right. This is like, I read this and tell me if I'm off base here, Dan, but I feel like this is kind of like the unholy demonic child of Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 5. I mean, you know, which I don't love, but like this definitely has that DNA of it in it, but like way worse.
Yeah. I mean, and let's be clear. There is like nothing of the plot of Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 5, but like Stan Lee worked on this, and like whatever muscle it was that got Stan Lee to make Peter Parker's parents super spies, I think is the same muscle that told this story about Silver Sable, reborn Baron Zemo, and Invisible Ninja, and like Alex, like what's not on my dinner table for 500 or whatever you want to go with the joke there. Like there's something inherently interesting about the creative team here in that like Ross Andru was the guy that kind of tied together the runs of like Stan Lee, the end of his run, and Jerry's run on the book. And so like seeing the three of them, occupy a space together, I think it's really interesting. But as Mark has tonally suggested and outright said, the result is not what you'd think you'd get from three luminaries like that working together on a title.
No, for sure. And I think just overall, like, I'm a big fan of Ross Andru, especially, his work with Jerry Conway. I don't know. I feel like this is pretty unrecognizable in terms of Ross Andru here. I mean, like it's very flat, very, there's nothing, no interesting backdrops or what do you call it? Like, real world,
equivalents.
Or monuments and things like that. Like
there's a giant castle, Mark.
Yeah, right. But like, Andrew was like notorious for like, hi, I'm going to put like the arch from the, Washington Square Park in the middle of this story just to do something kind of interesting in here, and there's nothing like that in here. It's very like, all right. And then we get to the Baroness, but I'll save that. But like, it's very flat. I'll just say that.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's like Bob Sharon, who I just complimented for Parallel Lives. The colors feel very flat here too. Like they gave him like you get beige, red, and blue. Like the whole book is this like dull gray. And I don't know why that is, especially since this is like the most modern of these four books. You'd think they would have at least like more modern coloring techniques to print this thing with. And I mean, who knows what the limitations were on Sharon, who we've seen do better work. But some of the characters here are unrecognizable. Like Harry Osborn has this like chin that would make Jay Leno blush. It's so bizarre. And like, I don't know if that's Andrew or maybe like Mike Esposito's inks that do it this way. But a lot of this feels very like, I don't know if half-assed is the word to go for, but like, it's sketchy in places that I don't remember Andrew. Like maybe, this is what, 10, 15, this is 15 years after he did the work. He maybe, he's getting older. The style is breaking down a little bit and getting more loose. And there's definitely Andrewisms, like the way Spidey goes through the air and swings looks like Andrew. And Andrew would do these like highlights on Spidey's body that would erase parts of the costume's detail. And that's here. And the graphic novel of it, like, lets him do, I think, bigger panels with, like more space in them. And Spider-Man is like smaller in them, that like somewhat kind of takes advantage of the graphic novel medium, although it just feels like a blown up comic book most of the time. But like, if you were coming to this to see like the best of Ross Andru, like, I'm sad to say this is definitely not it.
Yeah, I have to imagine this is one of his final Spider-Man books, right?
Yeah, I'd have to think so. I don't want to say that off the top of my mind or whatever, but yeah, definitely. I think that's accurate. And some of the images are cool. Like there's this great image of like MJ like leaving the subway that feels like the kind of thing you're describing. Like it's a perfectly recreated Manhattan subway entrance with the green and all of that stuff. But like when we get to Germany, forget about it.
Yeah, I was just saying this book opens kind of like very 70s Spider-Man-ish. It's Spidey saving MJ from a bunch of thugs who are trying to,
sexually assault her.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't be done today, but it felt at home, at least in an old style comic of
in the Michelini era too.
Yeah, I'm not trying to defend it. I'm just saying, like, at least it felt like a Spider-Man comic. You know what I mean? But let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla or cloned woman or whatever you want to call it. I mean, So the Baroness Zemo, who is the main antagonist of this story, as we noted in the synopsis, it's actually Baron Zemo's consciousness, or what do we want to refer to it as? I mean,
the idea is like, and this is going back, or even back to early Spectacular Spider-Man issues, is like the hate monger.
Yes.
You may remember from my favorite issues with Razorback.
Yes.
Is, for those who don't know, the hate monger, the villain, is literally Adolf Hitler's like brain or consciousness put into a new body. And so the Adolf Hitler that killed himself in World War II did not in fact die, although that's also inaccurate in the Marvel Universe, because in the Marvel Universe, it was the original Human Torch that burned him to death rather than him shooting himself in the head. And what amazes me about this comic, Mark, and this is going to get into the criticism, not even just of the Baroness, is like so much of this comic is spent laying out that history. Like Silver Sable just like sits down with Spider-Man and is like, let me tell you the tale of what actually happened at the end of the World War II. And like, and all of this like Captain America stuff and like just crazy Marvel history. And like, I don't think Spider-Man has much to do in this comic other than to just like react to that and go, that's insane. Which it definitely reads as.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So apparently whatever technique it was that the Red Skull used or whoever used, or I guess Zemo used to clone or keep alive the consciousness of Adolf Hitler, he used on himself, and yet decided, I guess maybe to throw people off his scent, was to put himself into like the bodacious bod of a bald woman in dominatrix gear.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's not even just like, oh, it's Baron Zemo in a female body. It's like it's Baron Zemo in like this, like who greenlit this? Like this is like I'm reading this. I'm on the train going to work, and I'm like starting to like hide my phone as I'm reading this, because I'm just like, what the bleep am I reading here? I mean, this is like I don't even know how this was produced in, what was it, 92, 93? 92. I don't even know how it was produced in 92. No less, like, I was kind of thinking to myself, there's no way this gets published today. Like, this is just like, and it's not, it's not because it's like anti-trans or anything, but it's just like, this is insane and like kind of offensive. But I don't know why it's offensive. It just feels like it's offensive to my sensibilities. Like, you should not be publishing this, Marvel. I don't know. I hate to sound so strong about it, but
Mark, there is a legacy for this. Like Red Skull did it with his own daughter, right? Like, just not what, 10 years ago,
right?
A Sin, the daughter of Red Skull, that is Red Skull,
right?
And then got Xavier's brain, but that's a whole other thing. But to your point, there is actually controversy over whether the story is considered canon or not. I imagine the answer to your question about greenlighting it is Stan Lee said, we're going to do it. And Marvel said, okay, fine. And because Stan Lee worked on it, it is largely considered canon.
Right.
And the Baroness does reappear in Captain America stories later on. But it never mentions the fact that she is the original Baron Zemo. And apparently Mark Gruenwald hated this so much that he chose to actively ignore it in his Captain America stories. And it created like some behind the scenes tension, which Mark Gruenwald was no stranger to.
I mean, this is a guy who wrote Captain America as a wolf, but he was like, no, I'm out. I'm not doing this.
Yeah. So anyway, a very strange thing. You get like, I love the combo. Like when it's revealed, she suddenly like throws on the Baron Zemo like shawl. And so she's got this like sort of like completely covered face, but her body is essentially nude. It's such a bizarre combination. It needs to be seen to be believed. And then by the end of the story, her face is like horribly scarred because she's like tripping from this forget there's an invisible ninja in this story that also like throws hallucinogenic gas around. So like there's a moment where the Baroness just shoves her face through a mirror and horribly scars her face, which like also didn't come back later. But like I'm guessing was supposed to be the setup for like the Baroness is now not beautiful. She's like this Doctor Doom-esque, like scarred character, but that would never really like pay off. Do you have any other like thoughts about moments from this comic?
I don't know, man. I just heard you like describe all that, and like I'm thinking back to our review episode of Amazing Spider-Man #2, Volume 7, when you were talking about how like sometimes reading Joe Kelly is like hearing your son Ben tell a story from like preschool or something like that, and like that just felt like so then this happened, and then like she like had a scar and like she had to wear a mask, and the first shot, and I'm like, this sounds like a 2-year. Well, how old is Ben now? 3?
He's almost 3. Yeah. By the time this releases, he'll be 3. Yeah.
Okay. A 3-year-old's retellings of his day. That's where we're at right now. So
this gets to a whole other side thing, Mark. Which is like you typically have a beer when we do these shows, but you know me to be such a lightweight. Like I have one beer and get ready, world. I think we need to introduce a new segment of like, is Dan drunk or is he describing a Spider-Man comic? Right. And see what the listeners at home vote on.
Or maybe like I'll have the beer in my hand and it'll be like, is Mark drunk or is Mark just like hearing this plot from a comic and like reacting? Is he like reacting sincerely or under the influence? Because I don't know if you could tell the difference on this. Like people probably see me drinking in this episode. They're like, oh, Mark must be lit. And I'm like, no, these are just absurd comics. I don't know what else to say right now.
No, Mark's an angry drunk. No, I'm just kidding. I also want to point out the cover to this, which like is also just like reflects that insanity. There's like a glowing white ninja in the front of the cover.
Ooh, and Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah, it is very, that's exactly right. It looks like an old NES box cover, like Mega Man style.
Yeah.
That's a great comparison. But there's like a German castle in the background, which like took the whole graphic novel European thing too literally. But then there's, without any context, these trees growing with like the faces of Spider-Man's villains growing off of it. That is so bizarre, and you don't get to it until like midway through the comic. The ninja like throws that hallucinogenic gas at Spider-Man, and there's this weird sequence where the trees around him grow into his villains and kidnap Mary Jane. And you get it's so bizarre, but seeing it rendered on the cover, like alongside all that other stuff, is just like, what even is this? Yeah. Not that it makes more sense in the comic itself. Which I'll also note, I think is the second appearance of Mindworm. Like one of the trees grows because Jerry Conway, I'm guessing, or Ross Andrew wanted to throw in some of their villains into this. So you get all the iconic, villains of the Spider-Man Rogues Gallery taking away Mary Jane. And then off in the corner is just Mindworm minding his own business, his face growing out of a tree, which, that's a sentence I just said.
There you go. All right, Dan. Anything else on Fear itself?
I mean, I just think it's like a misfire, despite the sort of like talent on it. It's one of those weird curios. I own a copy of it now, just to read for this in its original form. And I don't think it does much with the graphic novel format. This feels like a bizarre annual that we might have gotten one year more than it does anything graphic novel-y.
All right. Well, let's take it on home, Dan.
Okay. I mean, do you, I mean, obviously I think Parallel Lives is a success.
Yes.
From this.
I think so. I think Parallel Lives, and I think it continues to be referenced. The rest of these, though, no. I mean, like I feel like they've kind of been forgotten, and it's kind of sad that none of the Spider-Man stories really kind of have there are certainly plenty of these graphic novels that have a legacy, but like I think of these 4, Parallel Lives has the most, but even that is kind of, questionable, especially now that Peter and MJ are no longer married.
Yeah, and I would love to see Marvel do more with this format in modern times. Like, I liked Family Business. I thought that was a really cool like way of kind of doing this. Not only the European setting, the fish out of water stuff, which I think is like emblematic of all these things, you know. And we had Mark Wade on the show to talk about Annual number 5 and like Family Business back in the day. And I think that's cool. Like personally, I'd love to see. I want Marvel to have their own black label that's not like the Ultimate Comics. You know, I think they tried to get What If going again a number of years ago as a sort of like black label alternative. But like, why not do Spider-Man Life Story as a graphic novel? Like, have those pages be bigger and have that standalone as its own. I mean, it's maybe a little too comics insidery for the history that it covers, but I think there's a real opportunity for this. Spider-Man Blue, obviously started as a miniseries and is now sold as a graphic novel. Huge success. I think Marvel really misses out by not leaning into like the kind of roadmap of parallel lives and offering this kind of story to readers in a modern context. Even Family Business is a weird kind of like insidery thing. The sister of Peter Parker, and you need to know Annual number 5 to really get that. Like, I wish Parallel Lives could re-spark a sort of like line for Marvel in the modern era.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't know. I mean, like, if I'm being like completely honest, and you know, not to get like kind of cynical here, but it's like I kind of feel like Marvel in its current state has a hard enough time like keeping its current actual ongoing books in good order. And it's like, you know, if they were to be producing like these little side projects, I would be concerned about the overall quality of it in terms of like, you know, how far out of continuity or just off the reservation these stories would be. I mean, Life Story is a great example, but like Life Story, you know, worked as a mini as well. And
yeah,
you know, like, and not for nothing, it's probably the best of the Spider-Man miniseries that we've gotten over the last 5 or 10 years, just because, you know, like I feel like Marvel has a hard time like producing quality versions of these stories like separate from the main books now. You know what I mean? Like they just don't know how to put the quality and care into it. I don't know. I'm just
I mean, I look at DC and I think they're doing it wonderfully. You know, like Scott Snyder has had like, you know, AD After Death, which I guess that was an Image book, but like was experimenting with the format. And he did like a series of one shots that were printed in hardcover, like a graphic novel for Batman and his villains that were, I think, won some Eisners and were really sold really well. You know, and they've been doing their black label stuff. Like, I'm not arguing for them expanding their line. If anything, I would say like cut half of the Spider-Man titles,
right, and
bring in creators to do unique takes on Spider-Man that stand outside of continuity, like a Blue that is loose continuity, you know, like stuff. Like, I'd much rather that than like getting 19 issues of whatever Spectacular Spider-Man was, or, you know, any of these series, you know, that like feel like they don't really exist past the date they're released.
Right.
Maybe create some books that actually might have a life on the shelf. And could bring new readers in. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation for another time. So, Mark, why don't you take us home?
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but we want to thank you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning into this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk. This is the end of our Season 7 content, unless we pull out a few surprises. Dan, do you have something you need to tell me? I don't know.
I mean, we're known to do so, and I did think that I pitched one to you a while back, but it's contingent on getting a certain person to come on the show, so I'm not going to say it here, Mark.
There you go. Well, we hope you enjoyed all of the episodes we put together for you, and that you look forward to more discussions of David Michelinie's run in Season 8 of the show.
Yeah, and as we said back when it feels like a long time ago now, we did the Great Marriage Debate, where we were joined by Donovan Morgan Grant, who went up against Mark in a formal debate. I mean, if you're listening to this episode, I think there's a very high chance that you listened to that episode. And so we said at the end of the season we would announce who won the debate. And I think the results are actually really interesting, Mark. So people voted on the Patreon, for two questions. And the two questions were, who do you think gave the better debate performance, regardless of your opinion? And the second question was, whose opinion do you agree with more, the pro-marriage opinion or the anti-marriage stance? And I'll say it outright that Donovan won both. Who do you think gave the better performance? For a while there, Mark, you were well ahead of Donovan in the polling.
It was those late night vote dumps, wasn't it?
That's what it was. It was the late night vote dumps. It's a fraud. Storm the podcast.
I do not concede.
Yes. It ended up being 54% to 46%, which I think is pretty, that's a pretty good showing from both of you guys. And really reflected my experience, listening to you both, going back and forth myself. But interestingly, in terms of whose opinion do people agree more with, Donovan won 57% of the vote, and Mark, you won 38% of the vote, which to me, again, this is not a hard data analysis, but to me it suggests that you did a lot of work in your arguing to gain ground amongst people who would kind of inherently disagree with you on the subject, which means you kind of pushed the boulder uphill a little bit. Did you maybe win them over to a different opinion? No, but they thought you did a good job arguing your point, which I think is a tip of the hat to you as well. And so we can all walk away winners in a competition, as I said at the time, that means nothing to anybody. It's a giant waste of our time and won't change anything in the comics, and yet was fun nevertheless.
I won this debate by a lot. Okay, continue.
Okay. Well, anyway, so that's how it all shook out. Thanks to everybody who voted on the Patreon and supports the show. And so as a reminder, this podcast exists because of the support of our listeners on Patreon, where for only $4.99 a month, the cost of a new comic, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including the reviews that we do the same weeks the comics release, early access to our seasonal episodes. In fact, this episode was recorded well before the final episode of season 7 was recorded. Well, this is the final episode, but it wasn't the last one we recorded. And so people on the Patreon got it way early. I'm going cross-eyed describing that. But again, the Patreon lets you vote. It lets you get the stuff early. You get exclusive artwork in the mail and a ton of other bonuses. So again, thank you to everybody who supports us and our work. If you want to join their ranks, please go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the Patreon button to sign up for our club.
If you value Smart's comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. What we do on the show is admittedly niche. Still, if you find our Spider-Man commentary and community valuable, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
So, Mark, until we're escorted off to the realms of Cloudsea to fight against the fearsome lightning daddy longlegs to save our Earth realm, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.